Today on Co-op for Two, Greg and I have a deep dive discussion of Forbidden Jungle, Matt Leacock's latest in his Forbidden series. You're watching Co-op for Two. I'm Jesse. I'm here with Greg.
Thanks for having me on your channel.
Great to have you here as always.
So this is our very long, super long discussion. We'll see how long it goes about kind of our deep dive discussion. But if you prefer to just watch a quick one, we have our quick before you buy on the channel as well as us playing through the initial scenario of this game. But before we go to our discussion, let's take a look down at the table and see how it's played.
In Forbidden Jungle, the fourth game in Matt Leacock's Forbidden series, players cooperate to escape the jungle of a hostile planet by exploring and manipulating tiles and avoiding dangerous aliens. It's a cooperative tile exploration and action point game of low complexity weight, plays from 2 to 5 players in about 45 to 90 minutes. It was designed by Matt Leacock in 2023 and published by Gamewright. Players begin by choosing a starting difficulty level on the threat meter, either novice, normal, elite, or legendary, and then choosing a scenario setup card which specifies the layout of the face-down jungle tiles and the initial alien eggs, hatchlings, and adults. Different scenario cards are also rated for difficulty. Lastly, players either choose or are randomly assigned a player role from 6 different roles, each with a special ability and a number of maximum health points. Place all player pawns on the starting spaceship tile. Players take turns playing clockwise. On each turn, a player performs up to 4 actions, which include moving orthogonally, flipping your current tile to explore it, which requires it be free of any creatures or webs, removing an alien creature or web on your current tile, and operating the machine illustrated on your current tile. Machines on tiles include the configurator, which lets you move one tile on the board to an adjacent location, the destruct switch, which allows you to destroy any tile and any creatures on it, and a compeller, which lets you move creatures on a tile to an adjacent one. Other tiles include tunnels, which you can travel between, an electrifier, which kills all creatures that walk onto it, and nests and portals where new creatures can emerge. Some tiles show gears, which let players draw unique and powerful equipment cards when revealed. Equipment cards provide powerful unique abilities and can be shared between players on the same space. They do not require an action to use. After taking up to 4 actions, players draw a number of threat cards according to the ever-increasing threat level. Threat cards come in several varieties. Some cause new creatures to emerge from different tile types. Some cause alien adults to spawn eggs, or eggs to hatch into hatchlings, or hatchlings to grow into adults. Some threat cards cause the creatures to move between tiles according to patterns on the edge of the tiles, after which adults attack. Others cause adults to spin webs between tiles, which must be removed before players can move or flip tiles. One threat card will cause the lowest numbered tile to be destroyed. And lastly, 2 threat cards will cause the threat level to increase, one of which causes a reshuffling of the discard stack, which then gets placed at the bottom of the draw deck. To win the game, players must manipulate the spatial arrangement of the tiles so that 4 face-up crystals surround a portal tile that contains no aliens, and then gather together on the portal and activate it. Players lose the game if they ever run out of creatures or web tokens, max out the threat level, or if any player runs out of health points. All right, we're back. Let's start where we always start, with components.
So you can't get into this game without everybody's obsessed with the box. So we got to cover the box thing. We're back to the tin. Okay. Well, last game we had the box for Forbidden Sky. And this is the same exact size as the Forbidden Desert size. But just to throw a little kink in the whole thing, they it's like Island was a small tin, and then you went to the bigger tin, and then we went to box.
Yeah.
It's like bedlam.
How
It's
are
crazy.
you on that? Like, how much does that affect you?
I don't.
For me,
People
like,
are
this is
obsessed
the
with it.
only exception I would make.
Yeah.
Like, no other game. If
Yeah.
I see it in a tin,
Yeah.
metal, like, I don't want it. If it can't fit on my shelf.
It's not like a deal. It is amusing how people are really like. It is an interesting thing how people are very obsessed about it.
It's true.
But it is definitely worth noting, I guess, because of that alone. But yeah, I prefer boxes obviously because of the stacking and stuff. Although I do like to keep my games. I think it's easier if you keep them like a book and you can pull it out a lot easier. I think that's the best part.
Lots of board gamers are OCD. I'm not
Yeah.
really. I don't
Although you,
consider
just
myself
looking at-
OCD.
But you don't do it that way.
I
You
know,
got a lot
but
of
I
them
don't want
listening
this.
back.
Like, I don't want tin.
Yeah.
But I'll make an exception for
But I'm
Matt
saying
Leacock.
you stack them. It's more for you, as I can see behind us. We have a
Space efficiency.
You have them
though.
stacked up, which makes it less attractive to have tins even.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Okay, so let's move past that.
Wait, before we move past,
yeah.
one thing everyone should be watching whenever they watch us do a review of a game involving Matt Leacock or
yeah.
Rob Daviau, you should be keeping score because
Yeah.
Greg and I have a running debate about whether Daviau, because
We know
Pandemic Legacy is the game we
Matt
love the
Leacock
most.
is great. Yeah.
Matt Leacock is the genius. Rob Daviau, we're not so sure about.
Yeah, I think he's more hit or miss, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay, so the components on their own, as you know from the other games in the line, like are really well done. The art is good. It's good color palette, etc. This one has some pretty cool little minis. You know, for the theme is you're on this planet and you've got all these bugs and they're hatching out of eggs into these sort of hatchling larva type things, and then they grow up to be these big spiders that can lay webs and you know, like, and attack you, which is really kind of cool. And they have little miniatures for all of those things, and they look great. And you could paint them up if you wanted to look even better. However,
But hold on. I mean, they're nice. They're
Yeah, sure.
all different color. They're very
Which is
readable.
great.
You know exactly
Absolutely.
what's where.
yeah.
Okay,
However,
but-
the big problem is that they made them so they could stand up. So you should stand them up, but they can't. I mean, they fall over.
I wouldn't call it a big problem, but yeah.
But I mean, the whole point is for the piece
it
to
is
look
weird.
nice.
It's weird that they're not.
And then you're just going to lay it down. So
It
that's
is
a bit
weird
of a
that
disconnect
that
there.
they couldn't fix that.
So I would think, like, for me, like, I mean, I like this game. I mean, this is giving away a little bit away, but I think I'll buy this and I'll attach them to little.
you had
discs.
a good idea. Put them on.
Put them
You
on
can get
little-
little clear acrylic
Very
bases.
easy,
I
yeah.
also think
Or
if you just put
non-clear,
these
but-
in a little hot water and spread their legs, they
Yeah.
might stay
So
far
if-
enough apart.
This is a little tip. What you do is you put them under not hot scalding water. You'll destroy them. But if you put them under warm water and hold them under for a few minutes or whatever, a minute or so,
can bend
maybe,
them a little bit.
then you would bend them and then put them under cold water while you're having them bent or whatever, and that should help them to fix them a little bit. Now this is like an old trick for fixing minis when they used to have like a flag bearer and the flag is like bent or whatever. The swords, a lot of swords tend to bend since they're small. You know, they're like not as firm or thick plastic. So this is an old trick, but it's marginally effective. I find even if I do that, a lot of times the swords will go back to being bent or whatever. So I think the better way to do is just quickly take a little bit of, you know.
I think you're gonna have a problem with that. The last game we played had like 6 of those adults on one tile.
No, that's
Are
true.
you gonna have a hard time fitting them on?
We'll see. We'll see if that works out. But I think they're well done. There are a couple of issues on the tiles, the graphical issues, I think, which I think people are going to have a problem with. One of which is a big problem for people that have a hard time seeing things. For whatever reason, I mean, they decided to put these little symbols on these.
Yeah, they're
on
a
these
little
things.
hard to see,
And
especially on some busy of the
On the
tiles.
backs of the tiles, if you look at the back of the
Yeah,
tile,
yeah.
this yellow is and the black are almost impossible to see. Like from a distance, a lot. Like right now, I'm looking at this, I can barely see that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think people that have, and I'm, you know, I wear contacts. My sight is pretty
Mm-hmm.
good with the contacts in. I'm like Mr. Magoo without them, but like people that have problems seeing are going to have a nightmare with that.
I think that's going too far. They're not. It's not defenders of the realm problem.
I think it's
you
it's
you know
strange.
to look at it. You know where to look. They're colored and shaped. I do agree with you. They could have been better though.
Yeah,
they
way
absolutely
better, yeah.
could have.
It's
made
weird
it
because
clear.
like you have to really look at each tile, and I think that like it's cool that they use different shapes for colorblind people, but for regular sighted people, it's kind of a problem. And putting
It's a
two of them,
little-
I think that was their solution. But but they could have put something behind it. I know this seems like graphically that's weird. There's a few other problems where you find that like on these things like these little
this
chips.
is the part I don't like.
I mean, you can still see that where that number is sitting on. You have 1 life left or whatever, but it's weird that they would like put it so it covers up the thing instead
Yeah.
of moving this graphic over so it was pointing right at the actual
that's
number.
very odd. And this is like playing this game. There's a misprint in the rules. There are a couple rules
Yeah.
we'll get to, but my
Yeah.
point is, it almost feels like this was a long time in development. It almost feels like another round was
Yeah.
needed on this game. This is just inexcusable. It makes no sense that when you put your thing where it is, you're blocking the information.
But as a graphic choice, that's a problem. But that's completely doesn't affect your gameplay. It's just weird that they would have allowed that in. This is a huge deal. Like the red and the blue are very easy to see, but the other colors you really have to always look and say, "Oh, okay, that's the color."
Yeah.
Which is kind of and for us, like not as big a deal, but like for a lot of people, I think that's going to be a really challenging.
This is
piece.
sort of belaboring the point, but
Yeah,
I do
we
think
should probably wrap
I
up,
do
yeah.
think one thing is important. We've played some games like not Room 25. What's the pirate one that we hated? The Dead Man's
Dead Man Tell No Tales. That's hated's a hard
Okay,
search for,
but I do think it's important to distinguish in that game. In a game where like you could miss a symbol and then forget to do something, then that's a deadly sin.
Yeah.
Here, though, you know that every tile is going to have those 4 directions, so like it's not like you're going to miss
Yeah.
seeing it. It's just you have to work a little harder.
you have to work a little harder, and as you're playing a game, that's additional bandwidth that you don't need.
But talk about like this bothers me. That doesn't bother me so much, but these lines
this is another
and
one I
stuff
forgot. I'm
is
glad you said that.
just
So,
insanity.
if you look at this here, like it's like
Bring it so they can
this-
see it on the top. Now.
yeah, this has to be like, this is sitting in between the lines,
Or is it?
or is it? And we had to look in the rule book, and it's supposed to sit in between, but then this seems like
Yeah.
that's a
like,
space,
what's
and that's a space.
happening?
Like they're less. It's smaller spaces
And where
than the
is
other ones.
where are these difficulty levels? Does it point in between?
It seems
and
like
the rules don't. That's weird.
Like graphic design, that's like 1, 2, 3 big errors to me, which is
Yeah.
strange because like GameRight is like so approachable. All their games are like they're made to be like family friendly and super approachable, and they like often live in the mass market realm. So it seems really weird that they would make like several pretty
Why would
big
you
graphic
do that?
design errors.
Why
you know?
would you? Why
And what's
couldn't you fix
weird
that?
to me too is that like when you look on I think the back, or there was someplace right around where like they have 4 things: game by Matt Leacock, illustrations, cover illustration, and graphic design. He's one of the 4 people that are credited on this game, and they didn't do such a great job. Which is
what
kind of,
happened over there?
yeah. Okay. So anyway, so that's.
Thank you.
But otherwise, the art I think is lovely.
Art's very nice.
It's what you would expect from a Forbidden,
creatures
the
look great,
Forbidden
yeah.
line,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
from from GameRight. I think everything is, and it's not an expensive game, so I think you're getting quite a good bunch of stuff.
Okay.
But yeah, so that kind of flows us into the rules and the
Rules,
and
yeah,
the.
we have kind of talked about it a little bit, but
I guess we're getting a little bit of a negative points here, but we do. I mean,
yeah, stay tuned.
yeah.
But okay, so
the bad stuff
I
out of the way.
think in general the rules are fairly simple to follow, easy to follow. The rule book is reasonably good, but first of all, we found one rule that really confused us. And there's no solution to it. It's a problem. But while looking for it's a new game, so there's not much on Board Game Geek. But while looking on it, someone pointed out there's a misprint in the rules explaining how the healer works. And Matt Leacock has already said that it's a misprint. They're going to fix it.
Yeah, so you
but
can
the
point out-
really
Well, point
deadly-
out just for people
Yeah.
that are listening, so they don't have to like the difference.
it had to do with the healer. Someplace it says he can walk through and clear
walk through
webs.
webs.
And then the rules clarify that he can't. I forget whether the rules
So
was wrong.
there's
in the
2
back
things, if
or
you
in
don't
the
mind me
rules.
jumping
Yeah,
in. But,
please.
they called the healer the medic at
That's
some
right,
point,
that's
and
right.
also they said that the healer/medic can move through webs, but you cannot do.
That's right.
It's very interesting because, like, as a peek behind the curtain, I wonder if that was an ability that they had, and then they realized that made the healer a little overpowered.
Very
it's kind of
possible.
interesting because
Very possible.
it's a natural thing to think like, hey, there should be a character that can move through. And the other games in the series, not to do a comparison, but like that's kind of a thing is like avoiding. That's an obstacle that slows you down. Naturally, you would think to make a character that can avoid that obstacle. So it's kind of interesting.
So, but there is a rule that's completely weird and ambiguous, and that has to do with when you draw the threat cards. One half of the rules on one page says very clearly you're supposed to draw all of them at once and then start to walk through them.
Reveal them.
That's right. But then there's another card that makes you reshuffle. And that card says very oddly that when you hit that card, you should reshuffle all the discard and all the cards you've drawn so far on that round. But that makes no sense because the first rule told you to always draw all of them. So far does it make sense. And then should you shuffle the cards you haven't yet played and resolved? It feels like it just needed one fix there. It could have said shuffle all the cards you've resolved so far that turn. That would have solved it. Or they could have just said play all your cards before you shuffle them back in. Very weird, ambiguous, not clear. There's no solution on the webpage. If you play it one way, you're going to have an easier game. If you play it the other way, you're going to have a harder game.
So if I can jump in really fast. So we had just recently played Stranger Things Upside Down, Upside Down by Cool Mini or Not. And that has a thing, kind of a similar thing where you...
Rob Daviau, don't forget.
Oh, that's true. You take that card and you shuffle, like if you draw it and it's time to shuffle the discard into the deck, you stop drawing cards. And that's sort of a give me. It's sort of a, hey, you lucked out, you don't have to draw the rest of these cards.
Right.
And it seems in if you read the rules, that seems to be what it's doing here, which is giving you a little bit of an easier time. The game is difficult, so it seems like that might be a possible rule, and that is an interpretation. But it seems like, I don't know. Do you think we would have thought that if we hadn't just read that rule recently? It had to play.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there are two contradictory things. There's no way to unambiguously read those two rules. So something went wrong there, but. The truth is, no matter how you play it, it's just going to be a tiny tweak to the difficulty dial. It's just another example of it feels like this was rushed a little bit. So we were talking about rules confusions, but in general, the rules are very straightforward for this game. It's easy to play. Setup is quite quick, although you do have to have it configured in a certain way. Another example of where the rules go off a little is the rules give you this weird diagram of setup. And then they talk about these extra sort of scenarios, different ways to set up. Well, it turns out one of them is actually the base setup, and it's much easier to set up through this card. And this is one of the ways that it differs from the other games in a very positive way. These alternative setups are ranked for difficulty. So you can actually use this as an additional dial on the difficulty level in addition to the difficulty you set there. This is fun. Like, we played a different setup, and it does change the game. Character abilities are fairly straightforward. You've got nice player aids that everyone can see exactly what all the buildings do, what all the powers are. The mounts of each tile are here. That's something we often want to know and miss. So having these player aids are great. So in general, easy to play, easy to set up, maybe a couple different things that you might not be used to, but on par with the rest of the games.
So I think this is kind of an interesting thing, just to real fast about these different scenarios, is not only, like, I mean, they really don't change the game in some major way. They make them a little bit harder, just, you know, but it's kind of cool to, like, switch that up or whatever. But I think one of the things about modern gamers, and this is maybe a little tangential, but, like, you know, we like to, there's a lot of games coming out, and people tend to, like, play a game once or twice, done, next game, right? Like, people just keep churning through games like crazy. And, you know, and it's kind of nice to have to say, hey, we got to beat each of the scenarios before you move on from the game. Something like, a lot of times Jesse and I like to play like games that are scenario based or mission based and that have basically the same game, and each, you know, you can try different iterations or whatever, and you feel like kind of like a little bit of a completionist, like, all right, well, we played all those things and now we're good to go for the next kind of game or whatever. And so I think that's kind of a cool thing, and especially I'm sure it's so that'll go into this difficulty. This game is very challenging, and that's even on the easiest setting. I think
No, not the easiest setting. We played on the harder section.
Yeah, so that's one dial. The other dial is, you know, you can set it a little differently in terms of like where you start, which gives you a little tiny bit of a wiggle room or whatever. But,
well, it is wonderful to have another dial for difficulty, and it does change the game because this is a spatial puzzle. You're moving things around, and this one is so dense. You really you may have to tackle this quite differently than the others.
I think that's kind of neat. Again, like I like just checking them off and feeling like you played the whole thing or you played all the, you know, and that's such a simple thing because it's like 2 extra cards in the game, right? And I mean, it seems like that's, I don't know, maybe that would have broken the game for, you know, like some of the other, like the way that the other maps were set up. I wonder if like Forbidden Island would like you could have something like that.
That's a great question. I'm trying to remember if there was an alternate layout for Forbidden Island.
You're gonna be mad at me now because I'm gonna bring up a comparison sort of thing, like we talked about not, but like this kind of thing, like you could see them coming out with a pack. I mean, like we've talked about a world tour thing for Pandemic. We've talked about on the channel before. Like I can't believe there's no campaign to play through all these and have an impacting thing.
Before we filmed, I said to Greg, wouldn't it be great if they combined these games and made like a scenario you could play through? And what have you just suggested? You said, I have an idea.
I was a little swiper.
Wouldn't it be a great idea to make a scenario?
Well, I thought of it as we were talking. But I mean, just in terms of this card pack like this, like that's all you would need, really.
I have a faint memory that Forbidden Island has some alternate layout for the island, but I'm not sure now.
Well, we'll have to.
I'm not sure now.
Okay, so difficulty, as I said, is very. It's very challenging game on whatever.
You can certainly make it as challenging as you want.
Yeah.
Too.
So it's interesting. So I'm like, it seems like playing this game is much harder. Wow, I'm comparing again. It seems like it's in terms of a little bit of comparison. We'll talk more about each game and how this.
We're gonna rank all of the Forbidden series,
but it's if you have experience with the other games, I think it's maybe the hardest. Maybe it's on par with.
Take it easy with you. You said you're going to talk a little bit comparison. Okay. Now you're like ranking them and.
Okay, it's on the harder side. It's definitely on the more complex side, and it definitely takes longer than the others. Okay, I think
that is worth saying. That is absolutely worth saying that it's a longer game than the others.
It's a longer game, a little more difficult, a little more bandwidth, etc. And I think it brings.
I don't think rules-wise it's more difficult than Desert. No. Or even Forbidden Sky, although I don't remember much. But it is a longer game.
Okay. Well, let's talk about like because I've said the bandwidth and the discussion. Let's get into the meat of the discussion, which is playing the game, the choices in the game, the strategies of the game. What do you think?
I mean, I love the structure of this game. You've got these creatures. It's like there's certain things in Pandemic that just work. And anytime you see these games sort of use some of that formula, and this idea, I really love this aspect where like the eggs come out and you're like, the egg can't hurt me. I'm not going to waste my time worrying about the eggs. And the eggs turn into the hatchlings. So you're like, well, it's getting a little more dangerous, but still, I could just walk right by them. What harm are they going to do? And then all of a sudden these guys come out and before you know it, you've got this swarm of creatures and you're like, now we're in real danger. We waited too long. And I love that feeling of being like, you can see the threat growing. That for me, I love.
So I think, because there's a couple big topics of discussion about the strategies and stuff. So talking about just the enemies, one of the things I think that works the best about this game is what we call the tyranny of small decisions. And one of the things that really, I think the biggest bar or the biggest question that says is this game a great game for us for cooperative play is the idea, and I say this all the time if you watch the channel or whatever, is that it's like I'm gonna pitch a plan and then Jesse's gonna say I don't know, and then you pitch a plan and then we Frankenstein those things together and you have a discussion of what the best thing is to do, because the choices in the game are the most important thing. And this is like the tyranny of small decisions, because it's like there'd be situations where you have the spider, you'll have an egg, or both of them will be on the tile, and it's like, should I kill the egg or should I kill the spider? And there are some scenarios where you're like, well, the spider, some of the characters can kill the spiders easily. Some of the characters can kill all the eggs at once. Sometimes you look at the discard of the deck, which is kind of cool because
that's
you can
huge.
see
that deserves us talking about more later.
Because you can say look, I can kill all the eggs at once, but the spider can hurt us. The spider can lay out its webs, which slows you down. However, if you can kill some of the characters kill groupings better. You can move them. The hatchlings and the spiders move. Either you can move them with the compulsory thing, or they can move on their own, which might make them clump up better. So you can blow them up with my favorite, the big switch, which we'll talk about. Or they can run into the bug zapper, which will kill them. Or you can use one of the characters that kills them en masse. Or you can use them to explode them. So there are a lot of reasons. There's different shades of reasons where you're like, well, if we kill the egg, it's better this, and this. If we kill the adult, it's better for this, and this. And so like,
and you're worrying, as you said, about what's in the discard
and
pile. You always go through all of the cards. You don't know the order, but you know you're going to go through all of them. It's got a very like there are a couple areas of this game that feel like a refinement of the systems. And one of the weird, interesting ones, I feel like we're going to have to be circling around to a lot of these things. We mentioned a lot of points I want to come back to. But one of the most interesting from a game design perspective here is you're drawing through the pile, through the threat deck. You get the card that says shuffle, but it's the opposite of Pandemic. You don't shuffle and put on the top of the deck. You shuffle and put on the bottom of the deck. And it's so bizarre that it's like you're watching these like multiverse of Pandemic rules. And what happens because of that? It really changes. You know you're going to go through every card in that deck. It's a small deck, right? So you're like, okay, they've already done this. And I know we've got a bunch of time before they start doing these different things. They've already hatched, so they're not going to hatch. It really runs into you've got too much to figure out everything.
It is way too much to figure out.
But
before we get too much further,
okay,
I have to mention that you did a little swiping yourself because that was the thing I said was that it was the opposite of Pandemic.
You did. So now we're even. Yes, you did. You did point out that was the opposite.
I was laughing about that because I thought you were doing it on purpose.
So, but I do want to spend just another moment talking about a thing that we talked about a little bit. The theme of these creatures that each behave differently and evolve, that is really enjoyable. Like, I love thematically of the games. Like, I tend to like the abstract Pandemic. Like, I don't want Defenders of the Realm dragons and stuff like that. But here, the fact that these creatures, the eggs are going to eventually evolve to hatchlings, and it's very clever. Like, in addition to each of them growing into the others, there's cards that make each of them come out differently, and it's very thematically believable. Like the eggs come out of nests, the hatchlings crawl out of the towers, out of the tunnels, and the spiders just like jump out of a portal and they're like, hello, I'm right next to you. It's fun to deal with these enemies.
We often talk about the bandwidth and about things taking, and like I didn't like Great Western Trail. That's probably awful to bring that up, but like I remember like that was such a hard game to really like. It's a lot, and I remember like thinking like, I wish that some of these things would cut out the bandwidth. Like I mentioned a bunch of times how like Jeff Engelstein had this thing where he was like, this piece can move on green, this piece can move on blue, and this piece can move anywhere. And if you make one a tank, one a helicopter, and I say that all the time, but it's like it makes such a big difference. The egg can go into this can go into this. There's but one of the great things, just you touched upon the deck, is that this is, you can really see that Matt Leacock as a designer has developed and developed and developed.
Not only that,
right?
You finish your say, and then I want.
But like you can see like that. There's a lot of, and we'll get more into like the discussion about what you can do on your turn or what kind of overarching strategies. But each of your strategies, like you think like I can, if I wipe out all the eggs, they won't become catchlings, but no, they thought of that, and there's a card for each. To, you know what I mean? Like, there's a way around everything, so there's no way you can completely lock out.
It's such a clever, expert design.
And, you're going to start with 3, go to 4 pretty quickly, and then go to 5, and there's like...
the threat level, the cards
there's like 17 or 18 cards or something. You're going to go through, every 4 turns, you're going to go through the entire pass of the deck.
It's a small deck. We have talked about this. Boy, you want a heuristic to tell if a game design is clean and elegant. Like... does it have a big giant event deck of random cards, or does it have a thin deck that you're going to go through over again? And we talk about Daviau versus Leacock, and we just played Stranger Things Upside Down, and that deck is full of random event cards that you don't know if you're ever going to see the bottom of the deck, and they're like, each one has its own little thing. This one is so thin, clean, and elegant. It's like, here are the 3 ways each creature can come out. Here are the 3 cards for each of them evolve. It's so simple and symmetric that like you can wrap your head around it.
So this is a little tangential also, but I think it's great, very, very interesting for game design. So like, obviously I'm talking about Lord of the Rings, the card game, quite a lot, and so you got Lord of the Rings, you've got Arkham Horror, and you've got Marvel Champions. And, when Lord of the Rings first started, they would have these huge decks of like 50 cards or whatever for the scenario. And it would lead to a very different experience for every game. Now, the newer, as they went along in the life cycle, they would, shorten that deck to more 30 cards or whatever. And it would lead to a much more, you need enough variety in there. But the shorter it is, the more consistent that experience is going to be. Right. But you do need enough for a variety. And I think it's interesting that this kind of has that same approach of like, you're going to have there's whatever 18 cards in there or whatever it is. There's enough to make that a little bit of a variety, but it's small enough to where you're going to get a consistent experience.
Yeah, and you're going through the whole deck, so you
And it's
don't know
very
the
sim-
order,
yeah.
but you know
Yeah.
the probability. You know there's going to be three times this happens, and
This
then
is
three
what,
times
and,
this
you know,
happens.
you're getting used to this. It's every iteration of the Forbidden series has that mix. There's a few things that can happen each game.
That's right.
And you're going to get that a lot. And this game has a little bit more because there's transformation, there's bringing enemies out, and then there's moving them and webbing up things.
That's right. Oh, the webbing. We haven't talked about the webbing.
Yeah.
The other thing, in the same vein, this reminds me of Subterra a little bit in Subterra 2, in that, like, here's the deck of tiles. They're always all going to be there. You know exactly the mix. That means as you play, you start out not knowing where anything is, and then as you play, you know, okay, there's going to be one thing left. You can juggle in your head the probabilities of drawing a certain tile, and that changes everything. Being able to sort of intuitively grasp what's coming up. But I wanted to say something else. You talked about, like, you can tell. You watch our playthroughs. We've had people complain about, you guys aren't having fun when you play through because you're arguing or discussing. You watch our playthrough, like, as you said, we are constantly talking about, is this the right move? Can we edge? Can we get a little bit of an edge by doing something just a little bit more efficiently? And it's very rare in this game that there's an obvious move. Like, we played this game, and there are moves you want to do or moves you might be indifferent about, but very rarely did we take a bunch of turns where, like, obviously I'm doing this, obviously I'm doing that. Yeah. There's always ways to tweak it a little bit.
So I think, like, in that, like, so talking a little bit about, both of these subjects of not knowing what to do or having a big strategy, and then also Leacock kind of, continuing as a designer to, get better and better, hone his craft order. It's interesting because, like, this game does one of the cool things, which is to say, hey, what if we tried like an all-in on this strategy kind of thing?
Yeah.
And I feel like there's in this deck or whatever, there's answers. It's like they said, hey, if I was playtesting this and I said, I'm going to try this strategy. Okay, well, guess what? We're going to put some card in there that's going to hamper that strategy, which is pretty neat because you would think, like, you play through and then you realize, hey, if you lean on this strategy, and I think this kind of game, like, and even in our playthrough or whatever, or as we playing, it's pretty neat because you're thinking, like, in a normal, like, Pandemic or this kind of game, there's usually, when are you going to work on winning the game, the winning the thing that you have to do to win the game, and when are you going to, as you say, triage? It's like treating or dealing with the fires, the small fires, and it's kind of like a balance. I mean, all these games of, like, we got to push to win, but we have to make sure that we're, that we don't get overrun by these.
And both of us love the games where there's a where you have to make that decision of, is this the right time to switch strategy?
And I feel like this game, you're doing that. Like, so you want to do one strategy, like, if you eliminate all the aliens or most of the aliens off the board, then you can start flipping over tiles and things, but then they're going to come back really strong, and you have to keep switching gears, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could even go further in that and say one of the real surprises here, which intrigues me so much, is it feels like there might be strategies we haven't tried yet. It does feel a little bit like a sandbox. You were pointing this out about, like, how you feel like the design has been made to cover these alternate ideas. Like, there are a bunch of parts. You can move around the board, and we're like, well, what if we just isolate an island here where the creatures live? And you're right, though. Like, all the cards, they're very elegant, but they're designed to feel like they're combating that. But it still feels like there are strategies to try. And in ways that I don't feel like are in the other Forbidden games. Like, we were talking about, like, well, maybe we shouldn't flip tile. Like, we want to explore, but every time you flip a tile, if it's a nest, then it's more places for people to come out. So one strategy is, like, try to keep the tiles covered till you need them. Another strategy is, like, start destructing like crazy, give yourself a bunch of room. Another is attack the creatures. So it feels like there's a whole bunch of strategies.
So one of the really interesting things is that you have the spatial puzzle of, like, you have to move things around so that you surround your tile with your escape tile with, like, these crystals. But the thing is like, you can't just start doing that in the beginning of the game because you don't know which tiles are the wrong tiles, right?
That's right.
And the thing is, like, you could use the destruct switch to just nuke basically once you find a portal, then you can nuke everything else on the board, and you're killing the enemies, but you're also losing a little bit because, like, you're not, like, when you flip those tiles over, you get a piece of equipment, which is very, very useful.
Or tunnels to let you travel better.
So it's kind of interesting because when you blow them up, you're making it easier to like move the tiles around because there's nothing in the way to get it configured the way you want. You're also able to like move things in a way where like you can try to hopefully like keep enemies from getting to you as easily. But if you do it too early, you might nuke some tiles that are very useful for you. And also you're going to lose the ability to get those items, but you are going to kill the enemies. So it's like everything in the game is like really that give or take.
Yeah.
So like you don't want to go whole hog and just murder everything because also you can't move a tile. This is like one of those things I was saying, like if you destroy everything, you could, when you move a tile, you have to move it adjacent to another tile. And so like you can't just kill everything. You have to leave some bit of a framework. And also the smaller you make the board, the hard, the closer the enemies are going to be to you to move around, right? And like you don't have as much way to get like away from everybody.
And you isolate some creatures. That's great. They're not going to hurt you, but now how do you get to them when they start growing out of control?
Yeah, and you have to find new stuff.
Yeah.
So there's everything is like I think more than like most of these games, there's a real push and pull, and it is really satisfying to just nuke things.
I do think there's some real satisfaction in this game playing it, whether when you attack those creatures or you destroy a thing. Like there is some just fun of that.
Yeah.
And we haven't talked about the webs, but the webs perfectly fit into this idea of threats that are like, one web, what's the big deal? Then 3 webs, you're like, and like. It's fun to have these different things that behave differently that require, like when you put this game more than any of the others feels like there's more little dials of strategies interacting. Like, are they going to move this way? Then they'll be on the same tile. Is the cost benefit of destroying a tile? I feel like there are more little dials and strategies here than.
I mean, this is a little bit more. I mean, I'm going to do it again too, but like, I mean, the disappearing tiles is like forbidden. It's like Forbidden Island, right?
Yes.
And like
the moving is like desert a little bit,
and then the webs are like the sand and desert.
Yeah.
Like I mean, there's like it's like pieces of each one, which is really cool because like this series you should be familiar. That's the thing. Like you should be familiar with parts of it. Like you're like, oh, I played the other games. This is a new version, and it has those elements. I mean, it's a really pretty brilliant.
It does feel refined
like,
and refinement.
Like if you go see like the 4th movie in the series, you want a new movie, but you want those characters and those types of things that you're used to from the other films.
Yeah, I agree with you. One thing that might be worth saying is that I don't tend to like games where one of the challenges is moving spatially reconfiguring the board. I did not like it in Room 25. I didn't like it in Forbidden Desert. And part of that is because you're making these whole-scale changes that really change everything. Here, you really do have to spatially rearrange, but it's just you're moving one tile, one space. So it's never like the whole place is rotating and shifting everything. It feels much more I can wrap my head around it.
We did move a lot of stuff, as much as you would in Room 25.
It's fine to move lots of stuff. As long as it's like Room 25, you're moving a column and it's rotating around like you're changing everything on a move. But here you're just, you're only allowed to move one tile, one space.
Yeah. But you quite liked, we played somewhere recently, Subterra 2, which we loved. And you can't move the tiles, but there is a spatial thing is how you're exploring it. You try to leave a path.
Sure.
And it's an interesting thing about like it feels, because that's one of the big things about exploring, right? You want to feel like your exploration aspect is there in a game like this. You're on a completely new planet. You want to feel like, oh, there's creatures, which there are. They're dangerous, and you're gonna move around the jungle and explore those tiles and find what you need. And like I think that really brings that the theme of it out a bit.
Yeah, the theme is strong here. Yeah. And I do think the comparison to Subterra 2 is apt. It's interesting to think about. I did want to talk about the tiles a little bit. There's some interesting new stuff going on the tiles. So the first thing is they're all numbered, right? And there's a system for like when they start to sync on their own, it's all the lower numbers. And then you got to think about that a little bit. You're like, we're going to lose this tile so we should use it quickly before we run out.
You're probably only going to lose 4 to 5 tiles a game because there's not a.
But one of them is sort of the destructing tile. Like there were tiles we wanted to use that we had to rush to use,
which is a cool thing, yes.
And then I don't know what the logic is between the movement icons, so let's skip that for a second. But we already mentioned the fact that like the tiles give you the cards, the equipment cards, so you don't want to blow up things before you get that. But then the other thing that's a core part of this game is that you can use these tiles. Most of the tiles are usable in some way. You spend an action to trigger the tile. And that does create a whole new thing. Like, frequently when we're playing, we're like, well, I need to be near this tile so I can use it. And then you've got to wrap your strategy around being near a certain place. That's different. I don't know that the other games had that.
There's one thing about, like, so, you know, this is kind of a little bit about the luck. We really didn't talk too much about luck in this game, but
Well, we need to.
but we're going to, because it's a big deal, right? But, you know, it's like this electrifier I kind of thought was a big part of the game, because, like, if you get it out and it's in a good position, it's like attrition. It's just through the game, it might kill 5 or 10 of these things for you. In our first 3 games, we did not get it at all. At all. I mean, and that's kind of a big deal. Like, it seemed like it's one of the only ways to kill these things. And then in the last game, we got it, but it was way off to the side. And it didn't actually end up making any kind of difference. And it seems like the compeller, you're grouping together and moving them. And it seems like if you're ever to do that on the electrifier, that's a really great strategy. However, it seemed like because there's only one electrifier, if you don't get it or you get it late, doesn't matter. If you get it early, it seems like that
Or if
could
it's
really...
in a far position away from enemies. It does feel, do you not think that a big part of this game is sort of like you've got this random locations where the tiles are, you don't know, but then you've also got the randomness of what you reveal in what order.
Yeah.
It almost feels like sort of the challenge, if you were to sort of summarize it here, is sort of like taking advantage of the configuration as you reveal it. So like if you did get electrifier early near a bunch of enemies, then you'd have to change your strategy and say we're gonna use that. Like, you can't start this game and saying, here's our strategy. You sort of have to start it and say, let's see what we can get revealed and then make the best use of it.
Yeah, so kind of going into this, like, the luck and strategy and stuff, and normally we talk about, like, Pandemic, you got the player deck and you have the infection deck. And that's 2 areas of luck. This one, you know, the layout, like, even taking the deck out, which is a whole discussion on its own, like, the crystals, you opened up the crystals in the wrong order, maybe you've got one of the bad crystals, maybe the layout isn't very good for tunnels or whatever, maybe you opened up, you know, maybe you didn't open up the electrifier earlier, or you didn't, you know, get some of the tiles that you needed, or the destructing tiles early, or they got blasted away too quickly. That's a lot. I think this one has the swingiest, like, it's one of the swingiest things, not touching the deck, which I think is the big discussion part.
Well, yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think it's a little bit of just an our judgment having played it, because it didn't feel super swingy when we played it, but it always felt like, yeah, we could have drawn those cards. It's also because they chain react, right? Like, if you get eggs and the eggs hatch and then creatures, then you're in a lot of trouble. But if you get in the other order, the creatures come out, but there are no creatures, so they don't do their thing. So it did feel like, because they can build on each other, and then also,
Well, I think it's a snowball thing. Like,
yeah,
it's
it
like
does
it snowballs to be easier,
also,
but it snowballs to be harder.
So we haven't mentioned this yet, but like, you run out of any one pieces, you lose the game, and like, you could have the whole board filled with eggs, and you get a card, and all of a sudden, all the eggs are back into the supply in one card, and all of the hatchlings are out. So, like, it does feel like if you got a little bit unlucky, the whole game could switch on one turn.
Now, you could use it as a strategy. Look at the discard and say, hey, you know,
that's
like,
what helps it.
Like, a lot of the, you know, we have lost the card that
Yeah.
turns the eggs into hatchlings. Okay, so you know, you could, knowing something's going to come up, you could actually like do a good job and eliminate as many of the aliens as you can, giving yourself some breathing room, and that'll open up some chances for like luck that you've manufactured.
That's right.
But I think like this game can go from completely in control to like one set of cards later, you are in a completely other place. It's pretty crazy. Now, one of the things, it actually leads to a very exciting finale, and it's an interesting design because like when you surround the Alusit tile with crystals, all those crystals have like multiple keywords that bring more things out. And you're going through the deck, like every turn you're going through at least a quarter of the deck or more, right? So like at the end, it's like very easy. Like we played multiple games where we got to the end and we had things completely like, we were like, we can win this. And like everything's under control. And then one pass through the deck and it's a nightmare, and then and then you try to fix it, and then the next pass you're dead. And it really sets up for an exciting finale, but I think a lot of people could get really upset being like, look, we had it completely in the bag, and then through, like just one turn and the game is lost.
I think everything you're saying is true. You pointed out that the design of it is very clever. It forces a finale.
Yeah.
The fact that you have to put these things around where you're having to exit, and you can't have any creatures on it, makes the end an exciting finale. But the counterpart of that is that you could have it be very swingy at the end. But it is actually quite exciting. Yeah. It's guaranteeing you an exciting end.
Played, you might have put that picture up, but like we played a game and like we were doing amazingly well. We got everything ready and we were ready to leave, and it was like, okay, you're going to do this such and such on your turn, and we should win on my beginning of my next turn, or I think maybe even on your turn. It was like we went one pass and it was like boom, boom, boom. It was like we just got the wrong, like it was like, because you're drawing like 4 or 5 cards, like because it takes a while, and like we just, it was like one turn and it was like, oh my god, that was
it
crazy.
It wasn't quite one turn. I do feel like there were ways we could have protected ourselves a little, but yes, you're essentially right. One thing, again, I keep coming back to thematics, even though this is not the thing I normally care about, but what's fun is that like the end is guaranteed to be this exciting finale. It's also the way, it's not like you sink, like in Forbidden Island you can sink and you're like, oh, that sucked. Here, that finale is going to involve you getting surrounded by these giant spider creatures. It's kind of fun way to die if you have to choose a way to die.
Well, it's just, again, but it's like that deck, like we were talking about before, like where it can kind of snowball or swing on a turn. Like if that happens at the end, you've completely lost, which is frustrating because you could be like completely in the bag for an hour and a half and then boom right at the end.
Well, one of the things you point out often is length of game versus randomness, and this is skirting a little bit of that line. Like it's long enough that might sting a little bit.
I'm just saying I think some people might be like, but it's interesting, like I think like as another design thing, right, where like you make it so that like at the end, you got to put those all next to each other, and those are the area where you're going to get the most, and you're going to be drawing the most cards, and you're going to pass through that, and it's really like setting up for a very exciting finale.
It's really very clever. I'm not sure we've seen it. I mean, a Subterra 2 is such an interesting comparison. Is also similarly set up to guarantee a finale.
Once you pick up your thing, like everything starts flooding with the lava or whatever. Yeah, I think it is exciting, and it's like, and it like leads you to be like, okay, what are we gonna do? But if you lose, you lose. I'm not like so obsessed with it, but I think it's interesting how they set up that kind of finale. And other games like we played like that Star Wars and Warcraft versions of Pandemic, and at the end it like changes from a normal game to like now you're fighting the villain.
That's right. The Warcraft one especially.
Both of them do it.
Yes,
you fight the
right.
enemy on the tower, and then you fight the finale of the villain or whatever. And I think that's kind of cool, like right, because it like feels like it's different. Now in those games, it's different than what you've been doing. Now you have a new challenge that you haven't had through the game. Obviously, you're doing similar actions and stuff. And this game is not like that, and Subterra is not like that either. Right. Where it's
That's right.
But it's like it's kind of a cool thing, like just in terms of like creating this without having. I guess if you were to look at like those two games, the Clone Wars and the Warcraft versions of the King versions of the Pandemic, they change things. So you change what's happening.
Right.
And so that's a more of a heady rule situation where you're like, okay, what's got to happen now? Whereas this game in Subterra, you're doing that. Subterra 2, you're doing the same thing. However,
even Subterra has a rule change when you turn it over. This one, no rules change at all. It's just how you do it. But the other thing that's cool about that,
4 ways you could look at like creating a tense ending.
Yes, you're right.
Like, because people love the stand-up roll or whatever. The stand-up roll.
One of the nice things here, though, is it does add this extra element of like we have control over how we get into that end game configuration. We can delay it a little bit or assign cards. So we've been very positive for a while. One of the areas that you and I both sort of noticed and were like, is the player powers.
Yeah.
We love when you have these player powers that feel like they completely change the way you play the game. Here, that doesn't happen, right? Yeah. Like, there's a bunch of characters, we kind of found the ones we like the best, but they're all kind of like, how much do they really change it?
Can I weigh in on this one? So this is my theory on it, okay? Because I think this game is much more complex than the other games of the series. If you look at the characters' powers, they're comparable, to like other characters in the series. But because the game is much more complex, the fact that your powers are fairly similar to the other powers, they have less of an impact, I feel, on the overall state of the game. And so I think like it's like you could be like, well, hey, look, it's no different than what you had in Forbidden Desert. It's very similar, but it's like, well, yeah, but the game is a lot more going on, and so because of that, the powers don't feel like as impactful, and each game feels very similar. I don't feel like, oh, I want to try this other character now. In fact, when we're choosing the characters, I'm like, I don't really care. I'll be this guy or that guy. It's not.
But are you arguing?
And that's a big part of our draw to these games for replayability.
Absolutely. I think that's a real a real missed opportunity here, or something that would be missing. It would be nicer if these characters, like we played Subterra 2, and we've talked about how the characters completely changed the game.
Same thing with Pandemic.
Okay.
All the
So obviously we're in agreement that we would prefer that. But now then you've just given a sort of a reason. But are you saying that it couldn't have been done, or that it's better that the characters are similar and aren't exciting, or are you just saying that? What are you like? What is your?
I'm saying that the powers are much simpler.
Yes.
In they're similar to the other characters in the other games, but this game is a lot more involved, a lot more difficult, and a lot.
There's a lot more going wrong to wrap your head around. A lot more moving parts.
So it might
not
have been
rule complexity, but complexity of outcome of stuff.
Correct. Yes.
But you're not saying
in input versus
input randomness, output randomness.
Yeah. So I think that that these characters are going to be less impactful to the state of the game, as well as it seems like because of the complexity and what's happening, I think that there's a lot more going on, and so like what you're impacting is much simpler, I guess, or like much less as effective as like.
Yeah, I mean,
it is there are.
There's enough complexity going on that it's not so bad that the characters are similar. I mean, like, that's the best way I can say it. But it still would have been better if they could have made these characters more interesting. Although there's nothing to stop them from making expansions.
They're going to make another Forbidden game.
That's true. They haven't made any expansions for any others.
So, and I think that's part of the simplicity of this series and approachability of the series. I don't think they'll ever expand it. I could be wrong, but okay. The other thing is, I think
well, you could certainly have fan-made player.
I think one of the things that we've kind of been spoiled on recently, which is a trend I really love in gaming, talking about design and stuff, and we just talked about Lich King and Clone Wars and Subterra 2, is that all of those games, the characters have 2 powers each. They have like a basic power, and then they have like a power that they can use once per game.
That's
whatever.
right.
But it adds 2 things to your character, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it really does change things.
You're right.
And I think that we've gotten spoiled for that a little bit in terms of like having that exciting thing. And I get maybe it wouldn't have been appropriate here because of the family, the series is more family friendly. I'm not sure if this one really fits into that family friendliness as much, but I think maybe that's that would have been a little too much to put on the cards. Or whatever.
We've talked about this idea before, but it would be wonderful to see this made into a bigger, fuller game.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, I'd love to play this in this environment with these kinds of creatures, but in a pandemic weight game.
We haven't done this recently, but like this really there's a lot of thematic similarity, and it can kind of a little bit. It probably has a bit shared with that third Captain is Dead game when I think it's even called like The Dangerous Planet or something.
I think that's it. We haven't talked about this before, but that's an
but
apt
there's aliens
comparison.
there. There's like and it has a deck of cards.
And there is some real strategy, efficiency. You go through the same thing. That's a very interesting comparison. Yeah. We still haven't done reviews of the Captain is Dead series, which is interesting because it's one of the series that got us interested in game design and talking about games.
But this game, I mean, I wonder like playing that to see like what the differences are, because it's a very similar theme, obviously.
Yeah, but however, the pandemic, the Captain is Dead game that is most similar to that is the one that we enjoyed least. It's
that was
the
like
third
Dangerous
of the
Planet
series, Dangerous Planet.
I think it's
that's
something
right.
like that.
Yeah.
We haven't done that in a while.
Yeah. What else do we need to say about this?
Okay, so I think we should move into. Let's talk about our thoughts about generally the series and where this fits in.
Okay, and rank. I want to hear our rank.
We already guessed.
Okay.
I would like it to be known that I guessed Jesse's rankings correctly, which shows that I pay attention to my friend.
I guessed them
almost correctly.
Yeah,
it's pretty close.
Okay.
It's a small victory.
You want to start or shall I start?
It doesn't matter.
Okay, let me start here. I am a big fan of the series, but Mostly not in terms of me wanting to play the series. Like Forbidden Island, which was the first one, was a game I sent to my nieces, and it's like I enjoyed it. It's beautiful. The pieces are beautiful. It's a.
We don't
I
need to
always
review each individual game.
well, I always felt it was like a simplified Pandemic, but not for me to play, but great to recommend as a gateway. And then I didn't like Desert much. I just felt it was just too much, and I really didn't like Sky. So if I would rank these, for me, down at the very bottom is Forbidden Sky, the one with the electronics and the components. Then Desert next. Then Forbidden Island near the top. And this, for me, is easily the most enjoyable. And of all of those, really the only one that I would be excited to play. I would play Forbidden Island if I was just with some small group that wanted a quick experience and wanted to try. Like, it's a great first cooperative game. For me, this is far above the rest, easily my favorite, and a game that I would really enjoy playing.
For me, I think it's like Forbidden Island is a wonderful design. It's very elegant. It's a great game. It looks great, but it's hard to imagine me playing that over Pandemic, which I always feel like it feels like a more streamlined Pandemic. So I'm always going to go to Pandemic. So whilst it's a good game, I find that that's my least one to play. Desert is one of my favorites. I think Forbidden Sky gets a lot of flack, but I think there's a lot of interesting things there, and it's an interesting game. For me, this game, compared to like the other games, like I said, it's longer, it's a little more complex, and it's a little more difficult. And I think that like Desert is not as complex, meaning like there's a little more nuance here, which is really kind of cool. But you're sacrificing something for that. You know, you're going to be playing probably maybe twice as long as you would be playing Desert. And I think it's kind of nice to be able to knock something out in a shorter time. And that kind of like, you could play a couple of games and, you know. So I think that I still think Desert is my favorite because of that. Because it is, I think it
fits a niche better that you want fit.
And I think like, while they're both very comparable to me, they're both neck and neck. You know, they both have their strengths. I mean, you do get a little more out of this game, but you're paying a little bit of a price for that. There's a little bit of a trade-off. So I think Desert is my favorite, then followed by Forbidden Jungle. And then I think Forbidden Sky's got a lot of interesting things to it. I wish it didn't have such people really put a lot of knocks on it. But and then, even though Forbidden Island is a fantastic game, again, I'm just going to play Pandemic and play
And both of us are basically on that wavelength. Yeah. Like, it's a great game, but we don't want to play it. There's better games to play.
Yeah. So, you want to give your final thoughts and your rating?
Yeah. And then I want to talk a little bit about comparison to Subterra 2, and okay. I do want to mention that. But
then these aren't really your final thoughts, Jesse.
Okay. If I were going to give this a rating...
You want to talk about Subterra 2 first?
Okay. I'll talk about Subterra 2
seems
first.
like final thoughts are final thoughts.
Well, when we were thinking
it's like George Collin, he's like, what is this final destination? That's what it means. Destiny. Just say destination. Like, you don't have to say final destination. That's your destination.
Okay. So we were thinking about to give our final ratings, and I was thinking, well, I really love this game, but it's no Subterra 2. That's what I was thinking. Like, Subterra 2 felt like a deeper strategy game in terms of coming up with plans and the player powers being so different. The expansions were so interesting in terms of... So we both thought Subterra 2 was a 10. So that's the closest comparison. Yeah.
I think it's the exploration angle that we've kind of like...
Yeah.
Do you think?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of similarities, and the enemies not being so dangerous till they bunch up, and the cards going through this deck. Okay, so that's my 10. And this reminds me a lot about that. So I'm sort of torn. Like, it feels like a 9, 8.5. I'm going to give it an 8.5, though. And I'll tell you why I'm not going to give it a 9. No expansions are going to come out for this. So this is all we're going to get. Maybe the little bit of swinginess pushes a little bit. I do love it. I love the design. I'd be happy to play it more, happy to try the different characters. But the fact that the characters don't change the game that much, I think that makes it an 8.5 for me. You take your time, Greg. We're not...
Well, you know, I took a moment to drink my tea. I thought you were...
I'm like, here's my wrap-up, and you're like, let me just get a sip here.
I'll be back. I'm going to go quickly. Okay, so for me, like, I think this is a fantastic game. Again, it has that thing I love in cooperative games where, like, we each pitch our plans. There's a lot of nuance, which is really, really fun to strategize. And I think it has some legs in terms of, like, I'd like to see what happens if we blow everything up. I'd like to see what happens if we do this strategy or that strategy. And I really love changing gears through the game. I mean, I talked about that. I mentioned before about Chaos in the Old World, where like that game is like you're getting these upgrades and like there's no one path. You're always like shifting. You know, like I love that push pull of like this puzzle keeps changing, which I think is awesome. The theme is great. I think my knocks against it are, you know, other than those like graphical things that are kind of a problem, are there's a swinginess in luck, which, you know, can make or break a game sometimes, you know, and you know, and it's a bit longer than like the other games of the series for the complexity, I guess. I don't know, but it's a super. I mean, we've spent an hour talking about it, the interesting choices and the interesting things about it. So I put this at a 9. I think it's a great design. I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
I still think. I mean, I think I put Forbidden Desert at a 10. I do know that I put. So I think like that's the wiggle room there for me. Like, I mean, it's hard to imagine there are some games I would pick over this to play, but it's hard to really go toe to toe with this. With a
Now,
lot
let
of
me
games.
see if you agree with me about something.
Oh, I'm sorry, and and your point as well about the character design, I think is a player. You know what I mean? The replayability there.
Yeah. But let me see if you agree with me on this. You rate Forbidden Desert higher than this. But if a relatively new group came to you and said, we want a co-op to experience, would you not recommend this over Forbidden Desert? Like, I feel like
a newer like newer to gaming.
Yeah.
No way. This is way more complicated. I would like, in terms of complexity, I guess I would say this is the most complex. Okay, take complexity out.
I mean, this is important. People watching this might be like, how do I jump into this series?
How you win and how you approach a game. I think this one is the most heady. And then I think Forbidden Sky kind of breaks people's brains, and I think that's why that's the least
I think
popular.
that's right.
And then I think Desert, and then of course Island. So
all right, so we're going to disagree about
a
this.
Gateway game. If you're
real gateway Forbidden Island. Can we both agree about that?
Obviously, that's why I'm like confused.
But a little bit beyond that, I feel like Forbidden Desert is hard to wrap your head around. Is so dry. I mean, excuse the pun, but it does. This one is so atmospheric and thematic that I feel like I would be more likely to recommend this to a group that's not past Forbidden Island, but like after you buy Forbidden Island, you're like, I like this kind of game. I would send them here rather than Forbidden Desert. Forbidden Desert feels like people could play that and be like me and be like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in this world.
We got to play it again because I really think you can eat it a little, because you had a very limited experience with that. I'm really shocked in your feeling about it.
It's true.
I'll say this.
It's not thematically that interesting. You're like, here's the game of Forbidden Desert. I'm gonna be digging this giant pile of 20 things. I'm gonna spend my turns digging this. Here you're fighting these spider creatures and hatchlings. It's much more engaging. I want to
put this out as a little thing. Okay, I know we did our final thoughts and we're still talking, but one of the cool things, I never really got into Harry Potter. Don't really care. I'm not against it. I'm glad people enjoy it. It's just I never really got into it. But I think like if I had gotten into it when I was the age whatever, it's really fascinating that those books get more adult and more complicated as they go. And if you read them when you were a kid, and as you're growing, the books are growing and maturing with you. Like, maturing is the word, which is fantastic. And I think also this series follows that footprint. I think as you go along, they're getting more complicated and more involved. And I think that's an arc. So to me, Forbidden Desert is a gateway. Forbidden Islands is the gateway. Forbidden Desert is the next. I think it goes in order.
Okay.
So you could play them in order and be getting. I mean, if you played only those games ever, you'd be like growing as a gamer, or maturing as a gamer.
And maybe Greg and I will try to put together like a way to play the games in a series that would connect them in some way, not just playing them one at a time. That would be fun. I mean,
it's like there's a paragraph of like, hey, you got out of here and now you landed on here. And now you got out of here and landed on here. And then the last one you shoot into space.
It would be nice if there was some, like, you carried some of the creatures. You carried some of the desert with you, one of the players.
How would you even do that?
I
like,
don't know.
What benefit could you
We'd
give?
have to figure it out. But maybe
maybe
based on how well you did on one game, you started the difficulty a little differently? Or you could choose what island to land on. So if you won the one,
but that's the problem. If you win the one game, the first game, then you do a harder difficulty the next game to counteract
something
it.
like that. That's right. Do
Otherwise,
a little Pandemic Legacy thing. We've also found out today that Daviao is the hack because Stranger Things with those event cards. This is the clean, elegant, well-designed thing.
You probably shouldn't say it like that. That
No,
seems
I
like
should.
a harsh way
But
to say it.
Davio is much more for the experience and excitement, and Leacock is like, let's get the core rule set really clean.
My interpretation, which I'm not going to get lumped in with Jesse's like version of that, is that I think that like Davio's strength is in the thematics and the story of the game, and I find that for me personally, like the most important thing is the mechanisms and the gameplay. And I find that Leacock tends to side on that more.
Yeah, that's a nice diplomatic way to say it.
But I mean, I think that like Davio is obviously has brought some amazing things to the table in a lot of games. He's had some misses, but I think that like if you look at his career of like I think if you're going to be the type of designer that's going to take a lot of risks and bring new things to the gaming community, which he has, you're going to just by nature, you're going to take some big swings, you're going to take some big misses, and you're going to but on the big swings you're going to
all fair. But on the other hand, basically, Leacock can design a game by himself, but Davio needs a partner because Davio by himself.
Well, you look at some age like Joel and Ethan Cohen, their co-directors, the Russo brothers. There's a lot of like.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
The movie
Leacock can be trusted to make his own game. Davio brings some great stuff to the table, but he can't be left alone.
Yeah. Well, we'll maybe put that on a different discussion for another day. But yeah, you can watch our playthrough if you like. Hopefully, you found this interesting. Please comment what your thoughts are. We had a lot to say about this.
Let us know if you disagree on the rankings, what your thoughts are if you
There's
play
a lot
it.
to let us know. Yeah. What our feelings are about Davio and Leacock, what our feelings are the rankings of the game, what whether or not that rule thing did we read that rule right? Is that going to be a big thing now?
Disagree.
Like how people play that rule?
That's a good point.
How do different people interpret things? Had we not played recently Stranger Things, would we have interpreted it differently?
And if you want to see more videos like this, consider giving this a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. And we'll see you on the next video.
Thanks for having me.
You know what I just re-listened to? For
CD
maybe
wise?
the 15th time, on YouTube, is The Band, The Last Waltz, the movie performance.
Is this
The
going to be
song, no, it's not. But there's some amazing songs. Levon Helms, he's singing The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. I forget. They sang The
send me a
Wait.
link or something.
Oh, it's amazing. I'll send it to you for sure.
It's a soundtrack for a movie, or like
No,
like
it's a filmed concert performance. It's
see.
one of the best, most important filmed performances ever of the band. That's the name of the band, is The Band. With Robbie Robertson. He just died. That's why I'm mentioning it. He just died, Robbie Robertson. They played with Bob Dylan. Okay.
Are you a big Bob Dylan fan?
Yeah. Absolutely.
You don't really ever talk about music that much, and when we hang
don't.
around, you never want music playing. Or if you put it on, you put it on low, and then you're like, this is too high. And then
Oh,
you
it's
turn it
hard for me to...
It's too much.
If we didn't have movies and board games, then we could talk more about music, but we sort of got our plates full.
on. We do have some full plates.
Okay, I love talking about music. All right, here we go.